give you a small overview on SPSS and on a data set that I just collected. I'm Emily, by the way. Okay, so I ran a study on Qualtrics, and it's a two-condition design where participants either were assigned to a pop-up store or a regular store condition. So I had a scenario here where I randomly assigned them to two conditions. I used survey flow and randomly assigned them to the pop-up store or a store condition, and I modified the text that they saw. To learn how to do embedded data, look at my videos on Qualtrics and how to do Qualtrics. And then after I assigned them to conditions, I asked them several questions. I asked them a comprehension check where I asked them whether the condition they had presented them with a permanent or temporary store. They rated the experience at the store. Then I had items on the representativeness of the experience, so whether the experience reflects what the store and what the brand is really like and the brand's true character. I had a set of forgiveness items, so I would probably give the brand another chance or visit a store from the brand again. Participants rated the brand itself, so whether they like the brand and whether they view the brand favorably, and then also whether they would visit other stores. And then I had a set of demographics questions. So then, to download my data, I went to Data and Analysis, and I exported my data by clicking here. And then I clicked Export Data, and depending on my file format, I would go for CSV, for example, if I had an R analysis that I wanted to do. But in my case, I wanted to do SPSS, so I just went to SPSS here. And you can go to more options, especially if you have random assignment within like blocks. And you can also export viewing order data for randomized surveys. In my case, I didn't do this, but if you have assignments like changing the order and you want to actually analyze that, make sure to export viewing order here. So then I receive a data file and I open it in SPSS. And my data file comes out like this in SPSS when I open it. So I have a data view and a variable view. And in my data view, I'll have all of the different questions that I had in Qualtrics. And I already cleaned my file a little bit, but in general, this is what comes out. So because I collected the data on Qualtrics actually gives me the time and the end, the start date and the end date for that participants took the survey. I also get the IP address. I get how long they took to complete my survey. And I also get the response ID, which is the response ID that I have from mTurk. And then I have my questions that I collected here. And as you will remember, like I labeled my questions from 1 to 7. And so if somebody said for the comprehensions, like, oh, 7, that comes out here. These are my timing questions. Here are my representative items. Here are the forgiveness items, the like, the favorable, the visit, the buy, etc. So all of my questions. And then I also have my demographics questions here. I had an open-ended question as well where they could leave any comments. And then here, if I have an embedded data field, I'll actually get that. One thing that you'll notice is that the top of the column here is labeled, and it's labeled in line with how I labeled my question in Qualtrics. So on the left-hand side of my question in Qualtrics, I labeled the question as representative _1. If I hadn't labeled it, it would have just come out as something like this, like question 163, and then it's more difficult to kind of get a sense of my data, and that's why I always make sure to label my questions in Qualtrics before running the study. You can actually also change the labels later. It won't mess up the data, so in case you forget it, before downloading the data, just make sure to label your variables. The other thing is that SPSS doesn't accept like spaces, so I need to label my variables with an underscore instead of a space. That's why I have all of those underscores. And generally, I want to keep my labels relatively short so that SPSS gets it. Like this is already kind of a long label, so maybe the label like is better than a representative label. Okay, so that's the data view. The other thing is the variable view. And the variable view basically gives you an overview of all of the different variables that are in your data set, the type of the variable, the label, and then also like the measure of it. So the name is just the name, right? The type is what type of variable is here in your column. So you can see here, this is kind of a numeric type. This is not numeric, right? This is more like a string type. And then there's other types as well. One thing that sometimes happens is that a string will come even if I've collected a number variable. So then I have to change the type from string to numeric. And if I do that, then I can start doing analyses that require a numeric field. This is just design stuff. The label is actually important, especially if you forgot to label your columns, because it actually tells you what the question entailed. So if you have a question in in Qualtrics, the text will come out here. Sometimes it'll be like, if your question is super long, a super long text. And so then you can actually also shorten this text to be like the essential thing that you're interested in. And then you also have values. And this is the value label, which is important when you actually have the output in an analysis. If you don't label it, it'll just come out as numbers. But if you label it, then this will actually come out in your output. This is especially important if you have a condition variable. Let's just say my temporary variable. I actually labeled it as 0 meaning regular store and 1 meaning temporary pop-up store. And then if I have my output, it'll actually label it as regular store versus temporary store, as opposed to labeling it as 0 and 1. And that can help with my interpretation. One other thing is I always make sure to give my columns a name that is intuitive, even if I don't label the variables or the values. So in my case, temporary, level 1 means it's true, so it's a temporary pop-up store, versus 0, it's untrue, means it's the other condition, the regular store. So that's better than just labeling it as time or condition, because then I don't really know what level means what. Whereas if I label it as temporary, I already know that my 1 means temporary and my 0 means not temporary. Okay, so that's kind of the assignment of it. And I want to also show you how I do a basic analysis. I share with you, I think, a cheat sheet which I have created. It's not really a cheat sheet, it's just a collection of code that I often use. And this SPSS cheat sheet basically has code, because I actually don't use the click and drop menu from SPSS. I actually use the code because it's replicatable. And replication is really important. So once you actually publish something, you can also upload your code for a data set, and people can actually run your code and do it again. And also you can yourself do something again, and you don't confuse yourself because you forget what you did or what you excluded or whatever. Like this way you can really know every step in the process towards finishing an analysis. And yeah, that's kind of a good thing to do. So even though SPSS doesn't have, sorry for that email, even though SPSS doesn't require you to be coding, I would really strongly encourage you to do that. Okay, so I've already done the analysis, but I'm just going to show you what I did here. So I was interested with my, let me just use everything. I was interested with my analysis whether there was any differences in all of these different DVs, dependent variables, within my temporary as opposed to my regular store condition. So I thought, okay, I guess maybe my hypothesis was, maybe if you have a bad experience in a temporary store as opposed to a regular store, maybe you will think that the experience is less representative for the general consumer experience. And for that reason, you will forgive the brand more and you will like the brand more and you'll be more interested to buy other clothes from a store of the same brand but a different store. So the thing that I have to use, or the test that I have to use here, is a t-test. A t-test compares two independent conditions compares the means between two conditions of independent samples. So just, is the mean of this one group different from the mean of the other group? And I will link I will give you information on how to really run and what the basics of a t-test are in theory. But for now, I will just show you how to actually do it. So I've cleaned my data, etc. So that's my first part here. But the thing that I want to show you is how to just run a t-test. So this is the code for a t-test here. And this is my comprehension check. So I, of course, with my comprehension check, want to show that people in the temporary condition thought that the store was more temporary than not. So I just run my code here. And then I have my output here. So I see the question, which was my value from the variable view. Sorry, not my value, it was my label. So I see my label here on the left. And then I see here the temporary, regular, and temporary pop-up store. That is my value that I labeled. If I hadn't labeled it, it would just come out as 0 and 1 under the temporary. And then here I see how many people were in each condition. And then I see the mean of this DV within each condition, the standard deviation within that condition, and then also the standard error of the mean. And then my output here shows me the Levene's test for equality of variances. So that shows me whether the standard error of the two conditions is the same or different. In this case, it's different. And so I will look at the t-test and I can look at the equal variance is not assumed because my hypothesis that it's the same was rejected. And in my case, it doesn't really matter whether I look at this or that row, but I can see that actually the difference between the means is actually significant, which I can see here in this column. And the mean difference between the two conditions, which is the difference between this and that, is 3.45 or 3.46. And the confidence interval is minus 3.9 to minus 2.9, which means that if I ran this experiment 100 times, my mean difference would fall somewhere between this range. Okay. Even though I do strongly encourage running SPSS analyses in syntax, I also want to show you how to do this if you did click and drop. So you click analyze, and it's not on my screen, but on the top of your screen, you'll have analyze. And then you click compare means, and then you say independent samples t-test. And then what you just do is here, if you click control and then display variable names, it will change it to the labels that you gave. So my DV was comprehension check. And then my grouping variable, which is my independent variable, is temporary. And then I define my groups, which is the levels of my group. So 0 and 1 for regular versus temporary. And if I go to options, I don't have to do anything. It's a 95%. If I wanted to have a different confidence interval, you could change it by, I want to have a confidence interval 95%. I also don't want to do any bootstrapping, but if you wanted to do bootstrapping, you can do that. And then, that's the trick. Instead of just running it and saying, okay, you can actually click paste. And then what it will do it'll put your code and generate your code for you. So you don't have to write the code, although I encourage you to. But you can just paste this code, and then that way you can run it. So then you highlight this code and you click play, and then you get the same thing. So that's how to run a t-test, which is the most conducted analyses, I think, in marketing and psychology. The other thing is, this also is the output file. I always save my output file, and then I can open it again, which saves me time. So you can just save that and do that, or you can click on File and Export, and then it'll be savable as well in a Word document, which means that you can then look at it and refer to it even if you don't have SPSS. So I would encourage you to also save your analyses both in the SPSS output format and in the Word format so that other people can refer back to it, and then also you yourself can refer back to it, especially if you maybe don't look at an analysis for months on end and then forget exactly what you've done. Let's see. Another thing that I want to show you in this video is how to compute means. So often you'll have a scale like I did, so you measure several items for the same actual underlying variable. So in my case, forgiveness, right, I measured that on 4 different items, but they were all supposed to be like the same DV. So I can run or compute a new variable, which I'll call forgive, and the new variable will be the mean of the different types of underlying items. So I just use compute. This is my new variable, and then I take the average of the 4 other columns. So if I run this, which I've already done, I will get a new column at the end of my data. And this will just be the average of the 3 other columns. And I've done this in the same way for the representative and the like brand, the by other. So for my other scales that I've conducted. And then I might want to conduct a t-test, right, on this DV, which is the average, as opposed to on each of them separately, especially if the correlations between these different items are actually high, as I had predicted or planned. And that's what you do here is like with the correlations, I have a correlations tab where I just look at the correlations between 2 items like the like and favorable. And for example, here, like my correlation between these 2 items, so in general, to what extent do you like the clothing brand and how favorably do you view this clothing brand, right? The correlation here is 0.902 and it's highly significant. So in this case, like these probably load onto like the same factor, the correlation is super high, and so it makes sense to average those because they're conceptually also statistically highly related. If you wanted to do this in the click and drop down menu, which again I would encourage you just to do the code, but you could do again analyze and then correlate and then bivariate correlation, and then you choose the different items that are related, and you can look at the bivariate correlations between each of these items. For the compute, you go to transform, which again is not on the view, but it's in the top of your screen, transform compute variable, and then the target variable here would be your new variable, so for example forgive, and then the mean here you can go to, I think it's visible here, arithmetic potentially. So here's the mean, and then you can actually specify your variables and take the mean. And then again, instead of just hitting OK, you want to hit paste. Let's just call that forgive 2 because I don't want to rename. my compute at the top, at the bottom. I should have it somewhere here. But anyway, I should, okay. Well, my SPSS is a bit slow. Anyway, it's not visible, but that's the basic gist of it. So yeah, those was t-test and correlations and computing averages. And then maybe the last thing I'll show you is how to just look at the demographics. So, or the descriptives of variables. So you can look at descriptives with this line of code. Just do go. And here I can see that the mean age is 36 in my population, and I have a standard deviation of 9.06, and it also gives me the minimum and the maximum and the number of people. And the other thing you might want to be looking at is frequencies of variables. And so here with my demographics, I actually see, okay, I have 69% of males in my data set and 30%, 31% females. I also have the different frequencies of my household income and my education. And if you wanted to do this instead with the drop-down menu, which again, I would encourage you not to, you go to descriptive statistics and go to frequencies or descriptives. And then you just choose your variables that you're interested in. Obviously, you don't have to only take demographics. You might want to also look at the other ones. And then you can go through all of these. Here I can choose the things that I'm interested in. So I can choose more than just the mean and the median, but I had chosen the mean. Yeah, you could also look at the median, the mode, so the thing that comes up most often, the sum, the skewness, the kurtosis, the quartile. So all of these different things would be accessible in this tab. You can also get a chart. So maybe you want to look at the bar chart of this or a histogram. Yeah, just click around and kind of get yourself familiarized with the different options here. And then again, if you want to save the code, you hit paste instead of OK, and then you have it in your syntax. And then for the frequencies, you do the same thing, hit frequencies, and you go to your variable, you choose the different options that you want. Okay, this is the descriptives. I already showed you the frequencies. But yeah, so that's kind of a few basic things in SPSS, the setup of it and the different tests. So I hope that was helpful, and yeah, see you guys soon. How do I save this? Habe ich das nicht gemacht?